The cabin was burning. Silas Blackwood stood on the ridge, blood running down his left arm in a slow, steady drip that painted the snow beneath his boots. In his right hand, a pistol with one bullet left. Below him, the home he had built with his own hands over 15 years was turning to ash and ember flames, licking at the night sky like the tongues of hungry demons. Behind him, Hannah pressed close. Her dress was torn. Soot streaked her face like war paint, but her eyes, those green eyes that had first looked at him with such terror 11 days ago, held no fear now, only determination. "They will come back," she said, "before dawn. I know, you only have one bullet left." Silas turned to look at her. This woman he had met 11 days ago. This woman who had made him believe in living for the first time in 15 years. "One bullet is enough," he said, "if it finds the right man." The wind howled across the mountain, carrying sparks and ash into the darkness. Somewhere below, horses whinnied. Men shouted. Torches moved through the trees like fireflies with murderous intent. This is how it all began. Not with fire, not with blood, but with a letter. And a woman stepping off a train at a station so small that even God had forgotten its name. 11 days earlier. The letter had arrived in spring, but Silas had read it so many times that the paper had gone soft as cloth. He sat alone in his cabin at 8,000 feet, the morning light cutting through the small window in thin golden blades, and he read it again. "Mr. Blackwood, I accept your proposal. I will arrive at Blackwood Station on October 15th. Respectfully, Hannah Mercer." 23 words. His entire future compressed into 23 words. Silas Blackwood was 48 years old. He had shoulders wide as a barn door and hands calloused thick as tree bark. A scar ran from his left temple to his cheekbone, a souvenir from the grizzly that had tried to kill him 5 winters back. He had won that fight, but the bear had left its mark. 15 years he had lived on this mountain. 15 years of silence broken only by wind and wolf song and the occasional creak of timber settling in the cold. 15 years since he had spoken more than a handful of words to another human being, and now he had ordered a bride from a catalog like she was seed corn or fence wire. "You have lost your mind, Silas," he muttered to himself. "You do not know how to be a husband. You do not know how to be a man." But he stood anyway. He put on the only white shirt he owned, the only one without bloodstains from skinning elk or dressing deer. He saddled his old mule and began the long ride down the mountain, because the silence had started talking to him at night, and what it said was not good. 15 years ago, Silas Blackwood had been someone else entirely. He had been a shipwright in Boston, a young man of 20 who could read Shakespeare and play the violin, who had loved a girl named Martha with the kind of desperate hope that only the young can muster. He had a sister, too, Emmeline, 16 years old, bright as morning with a laugh that could fill a room. Then the cholera came. It swept through the tenements like the hand of an angry god, and it took everything. Martha died on a Tuesday, drowning in her own fluids, while Silas held her hand and prayed to a heaven that was not listening. Emmeline died 3 days later, calling out for their mother and father. But their mother and father were not there. Their mother and father had slipped away in the night, fleeing their gambling debts, leaving their children to face the plague alone. Silas buried his sister in a pauper's grave with no headstone, no marker, nothing but bare earth, and the promise he made to himself that he would never trust another living soul. He walked west, not for gold, not for land, not for opportunity. He walked west to disappear, and for 15 years he had succeeded. He trapped and hunted and traded furs. He built his cabin log by log, stone by stone. He watched seasons turn and mountains stand patient against the sky. He spoke to no one except when necessary, and even then his words were few and hard as flint. But last winter something had changed. He had stood on the edge of a cliff looking down at the 1,000-foot drop, and he had wondered if it would hurt. He did not jump, not because he was afraid of death, but because a doe and her 2 fawns wandered past, leaning into each other against the wind, and something about the way they moved together reminded him of a feeling he had almost forgotten, the warmth of belonging to someone. That night he wrote his first letter to the Matrimonial Bureau in Denver. Blackwood Station was not a town so much as a collection of structures huddled together against the wind like frightened animals. A train platform, a general store, a saloon with a crooked porch, a church that had not seen a preacher in 3 years. Population 47, and most of those were miners or men running from something they would not name. Silas stood on the platform, enormous and alone like an oak tree in an empty field. He had shaved his beard for the first time in 5 years, revealing the hard line of his jaw and the full length of that savage scar. His white shirt was already collecting dust from the wind. 2 men sat on the saloon porch, boots hooked over the railing, watching him with open amusement. "Look at that," one of them called. "Silas has to buy himself a wife from a catalog. No woman around here will have him." Silas did not turn around. He had heard worse. He had heard worse from his own father, back when his father still bothered to speak to him at all. The train was 2 hours late. Snow on the pass, someone said. Silas waited. He had been waiting for 15 years. What was 2 more hours? When the locomotive finally screamed into the station, belching smoke and steam, Silas felt his heart climb into his throat. Passengers poured out, miners with hollow eyes, salesmen with sample cases, homesteaders with children clinging to their skirts. Then she stepped down. She was smaller than he had expected. The top of her head would barely reach his shoulder. She was thinner than he had expected too, the bones of her collarbone visible beneath the collar of her gray wool dress. Freckles scattered across her face like someone had flicked ink at a page. But her eyes were green as spring leaves, and they were empty. Not empty like a plate after a meal. Empty like a house after everyone has died. Empty like she had seen things that had scraped out whatever had lived inside her and left only a shell. She carried a small trunk in one hand and a worn Bible in the other. She scanned the platform with the quick, nervous movements of a hunted animal, her gaze touching each face before moving on. When she saw Silas, she stopped. "Miss Mercer." His voice came out wrong, cracked and rusty from disuse. He had not spoken this much in months. "Yes," she said. Her voice was barely a whisper. He reached for her trunk. She flinched. It was not a small flinch. It was a violent recoil, her whole body jerking backward as if he had swung at her. Her eyes went wide, terrified, and she clutched her trunk to her chest like a shield. Silas froze. He raised both hands, palms out the way you would approach a frightened horse. "I was only going to carry your bag," he said carefully. Hannah stared at him for a long moment. She was waiting for something, he realized. Waiting for the anger. The backhanded blow. The cruel words that always followed when a man was challenged. None of it came. Confusion flickered across her face. Then something else. Something that might have been the first fragile shoot of hope pushing through frozen ground. "I can manage," she said. The ride up the mountain took 6 hours. They did not speak for the first 2. Hannah sat as far from him on the wagon seat as physically possible, her back straight, her hands gripping her trunk, her eyes scanning the landscape like she was mapping escape routes. Silas let her be. He had lived alone long enough to understand that silence was not always emptiness. Sometimes silence was a wall people built to keep themselves safe. The road climbed through pine forests, thick and dark. Somewhere in the shadows a wolf howled long and mournful. Hannah tensed. "Gray wolf," Silas said. His voice startled both of them. "Far off, at least 2 miles. They do not attack people unless they are cornered." She glanced at him, surprised. "You have lived here a long time," she said. It was not a question. 15 years. Alone. A long pause. "I had a dog," he said finally. "Name was Bear. He died last winter. Old age." Hannah did not respond, but something in her shoulders loosened just a fraction. They stopped once at a small way station run by a widow named Mrs. Cartwright, who gave them coffee and hard biscuits and looked at Hannah with a mixture of pity and warning. "You know what they say about him?" Mrs. Cartwright whispered when Silas went to check on the mule. "The mountain man. They say a trapper went up there 5 years ago and never came back." Hannah looked at the old woman with those empty green eyes. "People say many things," she said. "Not all of them are true." It was only later, alone with Silas again in the wagon, that she asked the question that had been forming in her mind since the moment she saw him flinch away from her flinch. "Mr. Blackwood," she said slowly, "have you ever killed a man?" The question hung in the air between them. Silas pulled the mule to a stop. He turned to look at her for the first time. Really look at her. Her face was pale. Her hands were trembling. But she had asked anyway. She had looked at a man who could break her with one hand and demanded to know the truth. "No," he said, "but I have wanted to, many times. Who my father, for abandoning my sister to die alone." He turned back to the road and clicked his tongue at the mule. The wagon lurched forward as if nothing had happened, as if he had just mentioned the weather. Hannah watched the back of his head for a long time after that. The cabin sat in a small valley at 8,000 feet, backed by sheer cliffs, and fronted by a clear stream that sang over rocks, polished smooth by centuries of water. Pine trees surrounded it on three sides, ancient and patient, their branches heavy with the first snow of autumn. It was beautiful. It was isolated. It was the kind of place where a person could vanish and never be found. "It is not much," Silas said quickly as he helped her down from the wagon. "South wall still needs boards. Kitchen floor is dirt. But the bedroom has planks." "Bedroom," Hannah repeated. Her voice had gone flat. The cabin had one bedroom, one bed. Silas opened the heavy oak door and gestured inside. "I will sleep out here," he said. "By the fire. There is a straw mattress." Hannah stepped inside. The cabin was clean and spare. A stove, a table, 2 chairs. Shelves lined with jars and tools. Furs on the walls for insulation. One door leading to the bedroom. She walked to that door and stopped. The bed was wide, built for two, with 2 pillows arranged side by side. Someone had been optimistic when they designed this space. Someone had believed that this arrangement would work. "Mr. Blackwood," she said. She did not turn around. "We should speak of arrangements." Arrangements. The marriage. Silas stayed by the main door, keeping maximum distance between them. He could see her shoulders tight with tension, her hands gripping the doorframe. She began unbuttoning her cuffs with methodical precision. Her movements were not seductive. They were clinical, resigned, like someone preparing for a medical procedure they knew would be painful. "I cook," she said. "I clean. I mend." She turned to face him, and her eyes locked onto his with an intensity that made him take a step backward. "And at night," she said, "I need to know what you expect from me." Silas could not breathe. "Will you be gentle?" she continued, her voice steady even as her hands shook. "Or will you take what you are owed regardless of what I want? I need to know which kind of man you are." The words hit him like a physical blow. He leaned against the wall, suddenly dizzy, and he understood with terrible clarity what kind of life this woman had lived, what she had seen, what she had been taught to expect from men. "Miss Mercer," he said. His voice was barely audible. "Hannah." She waited. "I do not know how to answer that question, because you do not know what kind of man you are, because I have never touched a woman before, ever." The silence that followed was absolute. Hannah stared at him. Her lips parted, then closed, her brow furrowed. "You are 48 years old," she said slowly. "Yes." "And you have never been with a woman?" "Never." Why, Silas looked at the floor, at his hands, at anything but her face. "Because I am afraid," he said. The words came out broken like rocks pulled from frozen ground. "Afraid of hurting someone. Afraid of becoming my father. Afraid of not being good enough for anyone." He dared to look up. Hannah had not moved. But something in her face had changed. The emptiness was still there, but now there was something else behind it, something that looked almost like understanding. "That means," she said, her voice shaking, "now that we can wait." "Yes, as long as you need." She let out a breath she seemed to have been holding for years. Her shoulders dropped, her hands unclenched. "I am a virgin," she whispered. "And you are a man who has never known a woman." She laughed then, and the sound was so unexpected, so incongruous with everything that had come before, that Silas felt something crack inside his chest. "We are like 2 children lost in the forest," she said, "both of us broken, both of us afraid." Silas nodded. He did not trust his voice. That night they lay in the bed together, fully clothed, separated by 3 feet of mattress that might as well have been an ocean. Neither of them slept. Neither of them moved. But for the first time in years, Silas did not feel alone. And for the first time in her life, Hannah did not feel afraid. The first days passed in careful choreography. They moved around each other like dancers, learning a new routine, always aware of distance, always conscious of space. Silas placed plates of food on the table and stepped back so Hannah could approach on her own terms. When he needed to pass by her in the small cabin, he announced his movements first. "Coming through on your left. Need to reach that shelf above you. Going to add wood to the fire now." Each announcement was met with a small nod. Permission granted, boundaries respected. On the second day, Hannah jumped when Silas walked past her too quickly. He stopped immediately, raised his hands, and waited for her to nod before continuing. On the third day, she watched him chop wood for 2 hours, studying the way his muscles moved, the controlled violence of each swing. He caught her watching and raised an eyebrow. "You are very strong," she said simply. "The work requires it. Could you hurt someone?" "Badly." Silas set down the axe. "Yes," he said honestly, "I could. But I choose not to. How do I know you will always make that choice?" "You do not," he said. "That is what trust is. Believing someone will make the right choice even when they have the power to make the wrong one." On the fourth day, Silas burned his hand on the stove while cooking. It was a minor injury, a red welt across his palm, but Hannah surprised both of them. She crossed the cabin without hesitation, took his hand in hers, and pressed a handful of snow against the burn. It was the first time she had touched him voluntarily. Silas stood frozen, afraid that any movement would break whatever spell had allowed this moment to happen. Her hands were small and cold from the snow. His hand was enormous and rough and trembling. "Thank you," he managed. She released him quickly and stepped back, but she was almost smiling. On the fifth day they laughed together for the first time. The old mule, stubborn as granite, refused to enter its shed. Silas pushed. The mule planted its feet. Hannah tried offering it an apple. The mule turned its head away with an expression of pure contempt. 20 minutes later, both of them were covered in mud. The mule was still outside, and Silas was laughing so hard he had to lean against the fence to stay upright. Hannah stared at him like he had grown a second head. What he asked. "I did not know you could laugh," she said. "Neither did I." That night, sitting by the fire, she asked him about his past. "Why are you so gentle?" she said. "You did not have to be." Silas was quiet for a long time. "Because I have seen the alternative," he finally answered. "My father. He did not hit my mother. He just took what he wanted, whether she wanted it or not." Hannah said nothing, but her eyes glistened in the firelight. "I decided when I was 20 years old," Silas continued, "I would rather be mocked by other men than feared by women." She nodded slowly. That night, for the first time, she sat close enough that their shoulders almost touched. On the 7th day, they went to town. Silas needed supplies before winter locked them in, and the marriage needed to be registered officially at the county seat in Granite Falls. They hitched the wagon before dawn and rode down the mountain in silence. But it was a different kind of silence now. Comfortable, almost companionable. Granite Falls was a real town, population 500, with brick buildings and gas lamps and a courthouse that looked like it was trying very hard to be important. It was the seat of power for the entire county, and that power had a name. Ezra Whitmore. They saw him coming out of the land office just as Silas was helping Hannah down from the wagon. He was perhaps 52 years old, silver-haired, immaculately dressed in a vest and pressed shirt and polished boots that had never seen an honest day's work. He walked with a carved walking stick and the easy confidence of a man who owned everything he could see. "Silas Blackwood," he called out, his voice smooth as honey poured over gravel. "What a pleasant surprise! I heard you'd taken a wife." Silas positioned himself between Hannah and the approaching man without thinking about it. His hand found hers and squeezed once. "Whitmore," he said flatly, "and this must be the lucky lady." Whitmore's eyes moved over Hannah slowly, appraisingly, like a rancher examining livestock at auction. She felt his gaze like a physical touch and had to fight the urge to step backward. "Hannah Blackwood," she said. Her voice was steady. Only she knew how much effort that cost. Charmed. Whitmore smiled, and the expression never reached his eyes. They were brown and flat and cold, like stones at the bottom of a frozen pond. "I am Ezra Whitmore. I own Whitmore Mining Company, and, well, roughly a third of the land in this county." "We know who you are," Silas said. "Of course you do." Whitmore's smile widened. "Tell me, Silas, you still have that claim up by Cedar Ridge, the one with the silver indicators not for sale. Everything has a price, my friend." His eyes slid back to Hannah. "Everything." Silas felt a cold fury building in his chest, the kind of anger he had spent 15 years learning to control. "We should be going," Hannah said, tugging at his hand. "Of course." Whitmore stepped aside with exaggerated courtesy. "Do take care of yourselves up there on the mountain. Winter comes hard to these parts, especially for someone as delicate as your new bride." He walked away, his walking stick tapping against the wooden sidewalk in a steady rhythm. Hannah did not breathe until he was gone. "Who is that man?" she asked. Silas watched Whitmore's retreating back with narrowed eyes. "A snake in a gentleman's suit," he said. "Stay away from him." Later, after they had registered their marriage and purchased supplies, Silas told her the rest. Ezra Whitmore came to Wyoming 20 years ago with $50 in his pocket and a pistol that had already killed 2 men in Pennsylvania. He built his fortune on the backs of others, buying land from widows for pennies on the dollar, foreclosing on claims, running out anyone who would not sell. 3 men who opposed him publicly had died in accidents. 2 fell down mine shafts. 1 was killed by bandits on the road home. No one could prove anything. No one dared try. His wife, a wealthy woman from Boston, died of an illness 5 years ago. Whitmore inherited everything she had, and there were whispers that her illness had been helped along by something other than nature. "He wants my land," Silas said. "There are signs of silver in the hills, and he wants it. Then why does he not just take it? Because I am not a widow, he can bully, or a drunk he can foreclose on." He paused. "And because up on that mountain I am dangerous in ways he is not prepared for." Hannah looked at him. This man who had apologized for reaching for her suitcase, who slept on the floor so she could have the bed, who announced his movements in the cabin so she would never be startled. "You do not seem dangerous," she said. "To you I am not." Silas's jaw tightened. "To anyone who tries to hurt you, I am the most dangerous thing in this territory." That night, back in the cabin, Hannah asked him to hold her hand. They sat by the fire, closer than they had ever been, and she placed her small hand in his enormous palm. He closed his fingers around hers gently, so gently, like he was holding something precious and breakable. And then he cried. The tears came without warning, sliding down his weathered cheeks and into his beard. He did not sob. He did not make a sound. Just tears, silent and steady, falling like rain on a window. Silas Hannah whispered. 15 years, he said. His voice was wrecked. 15 years since I felt the warmth of another person. Hannah did not pull away. She cried too, but for different reasons. For the first time in her life, being touched did not hurt. "I was afraid," she whispered. "Every day of my life I was afraid. Of my father. Of the men in the streets. Of Marcus Webb." "Who is Marcus Webb?" The words came slowly, pulled from a place she had tried to bury. "A money lender in Boston. My father died owing him $200. Webb offered to forgive the debt in exchange for me." Silas's hand tightened on hers, then consciously relaxed. "I refused." Hannah continued. "For 4 years. I worked 16 hours a day in a garment factory. I ate 1 meal a day. I sent every penny home. But interest compounds. 200 became 350. Webb came to our home every week. He said if I did not come to him willingly, he would throw my mother and sisters onto the street." Silas said nothing, but his eyes burned. "Then I saw the advertisement," Hannah said. "Western men seeking wives. I thought between Webb and a stranger in Wyoming, at least the stranger would not know my face. At least I might be able to run." She looked up at him, her green eyes wet with tears but clear. "But I am not running anymore," she said. "I chose to come here. I chose you even before I knew who you were. I am not goods shipped from Boston. I am a woman who made a decision, and that decision is to stay." Silas raised her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles with a tenderness that made her heart ache. "Then stay," he said, "for as long as you want, for as long as forever, if forever is what you choose." 11 days later, the cabin was burning. But that night in the small space before the fire, two people who had been broken by the world found something neither of them expected: a reason to keep living. The morning after they held hands for the first time, Silas woke before dawn as he always did. But something was different. For the first time in 15 years he did not dread the silence. Hannah was still asleep in the bedroom, her breathing soft and even through the thin wall. He lay on his straw mattress by the dying fire and listened to that sound like it was music. Then he went to check on the horses. The stable door was open. Silas stopped cold. He had latched that door himself last night. He always latched that door. 15 years of living alone had made certain habits into rituals, and securing the animals was chief among them. He pulled his knife from his belt and approached slowly. The smell hit him first. Copper and iron. The smell of blood. Bella lay in a pool of it, her neck cut clean from ear to ear. She was 12 years old. She had carried him through 10 winters, through blizzards and floods, and one memorable encounter with a mountain lion that had left them both scarred. Now she stared at nothing with glassy eyes. On the wall behind her, written in her blood, were 4 words: "Sell or die." Silas did not remember screaming. He did not remember falling to his knees beside the body of the only creature that had been his companion for a decade. He did not remember Hannah running out in her nightgown, her feet bare on the frozen ground, her voice calling his name. But he remembered the rage. It rose up from somewhere deep and primal, a black tide that threatened to drown everything in its path. His vision went red. His hands shook. For one terrible moment he was not Silas Blackwood, the gentle man who announced his movements so his wife would not be startled. He was something older, something savage, something that wanted to tear Ezra Whitmore apart with his bare hands and feed the pieces to the wolves. "Silas!" Hannah's voice cut through the fog. He blinked. She was standing at the stable door, her face white, her hand pressed over her mouth. "Do not look," he said. His voice sounded like it belonged to someone else. "You should not see this." But she had already seen, and she understood. "Whitmore," she said. It was not a question. The week that followed was a descent into hell. On the second day someone cut their fence in the night. By morning, wild sheep had found their way into the vegetable garden and destroyed everything. The cabbages Hannah had tended so carefully, the root vegetables that would have seen them through winter, the herbs she had planted near the cabin door. All of it trampled and eaten and ruined. On the 4th day, the storage shed caught fire. Silas smelled the smoke before he saw the flames. By the time he reached the shed, it was fully engulfed. Inside were the furs he had spent all year trapping and preparing, his entire income for the season. Everything they would have used to buy supplies and seed and medicine, gone in 20 minutes. He stood and watched it burn Hannah beside him, their faces lit orange by the flames. "We cannot prove it was him," Hannah said quietly. "We do not need to prove it. We know." On the 6th day a letter appeared. Neither of them saw who delivered it. It was simply there when Silas opened the door in the morning, a cream-colored envelope lying on the porch like a coiled snake. "Mr. Blackwood," the letter read, "I understand your wife arrived from Boston under interesting circumstances. A mail-order bride, they call it. I wonder if she has told you about Marcus Webb and the particular nature of the debt she fled. I wonder if she has told you what services she nearly provided to settle that debt. Meet me in Granite Falls to discuss your options, or wait until the whole county knows what kind of woman you married. Signed, E.W." Silas read the letter twice. Then he fed it to the fire. "You read it," Hannah said. She was standing by the window, her arms wrapped around herself. What did it say? Lies designed to pressure us. not entirely lies. He turned to look at her. She was trembling, but she did not look away. I nearly had to do those things she said. Her voice was barely a whisper. If I had not found the advertisement, if I had not run, Webb would have sold me to anyone who could pay. Nearly is not the same as did. Does it matter? Her voice cracked. To men like Whitmore, the accusation is enough. The rumor is enough. He will destroy my reputation, and through me he will destroy you. Silas crossed the room in 3 strides. He stopped an arm's length away from her, respecting the boundary they had established, but close enough that she could see the truth in his eyes. "Hannah," he said, "I do not care what you nearly did. I do not care what anyone says you did. You are here, with me. That is the only thing that matters." "Why?" "Because you chose me," he said simply, "and I choose you. Everything else is noise." That night Silas made a decision. They would go to Granite Falls. They would confront Whitmore directly. They would make it clear that neither threats nor violence would change anything. It was in retrospect exactly what Whitmore wanted them to do. The ride down the mountain was tense and silent. Hannah insisted on coming despite Silas's objections. "I am not a doll to be kept in a cabinet," she said, and there was steel in her voice that had not been there a week ago. "I am your wife. We face this together." Silas wanted to argue. He wanted to lock her in the cabin and handle this himself, but he remembered what he had said about trust and choices, and he nodded. "Together, then." Whitmore's office was on the 2nd floor of the finest building in Granite Falls, a brick structure with large windows and a brass nameplate that read, "Whitmore Enterprises." Cole Jennings was waiting for them at the top of the stairs. Silas had heard of Jennings. Everyone in the county had. He was a former soldier dishonorably discharged for killing a fellow trooper in a dispute over cards. He had drifted west and found employment with Whitmore, serving as enforcer, debt collector, and, according to rumor, executioner. He was tall and lean with the coiled stillness of a rattlesnake, and he smiled when he saw them coming. "Mr. and Mrs. Blackwood," he said, "the boss has been expecting you." Whitmore's office was designed to intimidate. A massive mahogany desk, leather chairs, oil paintings of mountain landscapes on the walls, floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over the town like a lord surveying his domain. Whitmore himself sat behind the desk, turning a small knife over in his fingers. "Silas," he said warmly, "and the lovely Mrs. Blackwood, please sit down." "Whiskey." "We did not come to drink," Silas growled. "We came to tell you to stop." "Stop what?" Whitmore's eyes were wide with innocent confusion, but his smile was the smile of a cat playing with a mouse. The horse, the garden, the shed, the letters, all of it. "My dear man, I have no idea what you are talking about. I have been in this office every day this week. Just ask anyone." Silas took a step forward. Jennings moved to intercept his hand drifting toward the pistol on his hip. "We know it was you," Hannah said. Her voice was calm, steady. It surprised everyone in the room, including herself. "And we are not going to sell." Whitmore's smile faltered. He set down the knife and stood. "The mail-order bride speaks," he said. His voice had lost its warmth. "Tell me, Mrs. Blackwood, does your husband know exactly what he purchased?" A woman one step removed from the brothel. A woman who would have spread her legs for any man with coin if circumstances had been slightly different. Hannah did not flinch. She did not look away. "I was never in a brothel," she said. "I was never with any man. And I chose to come here. I chose Silas. I was not traded. I was not sold. I made a decision, and I stand by it." She stepped forward, and for a moment she was not the frightened girl who had flinched on the train platform. She was something else entirely. "You think you can intimidate me with rumors," she said. "I have survived worse than you. I have survived men who did not bother with words before they took what they wanted. I have survived poverty and disease and 4 years of 18-hour days in a factory that treated us like machines." Her voice rose. "I walked 3,000 miles to escape a man like you, and I will not be bullied by another one." The silence that followed was deafening. Whitmore stared at her like she had grown a second head. Even Jennings looked uncertain. Then Whitmore laughed. "Oh, she has spirit," he said. "I can see why you bought her, Silas. Tell me, Does she fight this hard in the bedroom, or is that still territory you have not explored? Silas moved faster than anyone expected. He crossed the space between them in 2 strides, grabbed Whitmore by the collar, and slammed him against the wall hard enough to crack the plaster. Jennings drew his pistol. Silas did not even look at him. "Touch my wife," Silas said, his voice low and deadly, "and I will kill you. Threaten my wife, and I will kill you. Come near my land again, and I will kill you." "Do you understand?" Whitmore's face had gone purple. He clawed at Silas's hands, but the grip was iron. "Jennings," he choked. Silas felt the pistol barrel press against his temple. "Let him go," Jennings said, "or I scatter your brains across the wall." For a long moment nobody moved. Then Hannah spoke. "If you shoot him," she said quietly, "I will testify in court that it was murder. I will describe how he came to discuss a land dispute and your employer had him executed. I will make sure every newspaper from here to San Francisco prints the story." Jennings hesitated. "Your employer is rich," Hannah continued, "but he is not above the law, not federal law. And murder of an unarmed man in front of a witness will not be something money can make disappear." The silence stretched. "Let him go," Silas, Hannah said gently. "He is not worth hanging for." Silas held Whitmore's gaze for one more heartbeat, then he released him. Whitmore collapsed against the wall, gasping for breath. His carefully groomed hair was disheveled. His perfect composure was shattered. "Get out," he wheezed. "Get out of my office." Silas took Hannah's hand and walked toward the door. He paused at the threshold. "Remember what I said, Whitmore. Every word." They left Jennings helping his employer to a chair, and they did not look back. But Hannah saw Whitmore's face as they walked out. It was not angry, it was hungry. That night Silas could not sleep. He sat by the window of their small cabin rifle across his knees, watching the darkness for movement. The confrontation with Whitmore had felt like a victory at the time. Now it felt like a mistake. Men like Whitmore did not forgive public humiliation. Men like Whitmore did not forget. "You should sleep," Hannah said from behind him. He turned. She was standing in the bedroom doorway, wrapped in a blanket, her hair loose around her shoulders. "I will keep watch," he said. "You cannot watch forever. I can try." She crossed the room and sat beside him. After a moment's hesitation, she leaned her head against his shoulder. He went still. "Is this all right?" she asked. "Yes." He let out a breath. "Yes." They sat together in the darkness, watching the stars wheel overhead, and Silas allowed himself to imagine a future where Whitmore was just a bad memory, a future where he and Hannah grew old together in this cabin, a future with children playing by the stream and grandchildren learning to ride horses. It was a beautiful dream. It lasted 3 more days. The storm came without warning. One moment the sky was clear. The next clouds boiled over the mountains like something alive, and snow began to fall in thick, heavy sheets. By nightfall, the world had disappeared. The cabin was an island in a sea of white, isolated and alone. That was when someone knocked on the door. Silas grabbed his rifle. Hannah moved behind him, pressing herself against the wall. "Who is there?" Silas called. "Please," a woman's voice, thin and desperate. "Please help me." Silas looked at Hannah. She nodded once. He opened the door. The girl could not have been more than 19. She stood shivering in the snow, her dress torn, her face bruised, her feet bare and bleeding. She was so thin that her cheekbones stood out like knife blades. "Please," she whispered again. And then she collapsed. Her name was Mary. They carried her inside, wrapped her in blankets, fed her broth. She ate like someone who had not seen food in days, which Silas suspected was the truth. Between sips, she told them her story. She had been working at a house in Granite Falls. A special house, she called it, though she would not meet their eyes when she said it. She had been taken there against her will 2 months ago, held by force, used by men who paid for the privilege. It was owned by Ezra Whitmore. She had escaped during the storm, running blindly into the night, and she had walked until she could not walk anymore. "Someone told me about the cabin in the mountains," she said there was a man there who might help, who Silas asked sharply. "Who told you?" Mary looked down at her hands. "I do not remember. A woman in the house. She said, 'Follow the stream uphill and you will find it.'" Hannah believed her instantly. She sat beside Mary, holding her hand, tears streaming down her face. Silas was not so sure. That night, after Mary had fallen asleep by the fire, he pulled Hannah aside. "How did she find us?" he whispered. "In a blizzard at night with no lantern. She followed the stream like she said." "No." Silas shook his head. "The stream forks 3 times between here and Granite Falls. In a storm like this in the dark, she would have gotten lost. She would have frozen to death." "You think she is lying?" "I think something does not add up." Hannah looked at the sleeping girl, at her bruised face and her thin wrists. "Even if you are right," she said, "we cannot turn her away. Not in this weather, not after what she has been through." Silas could not argue with that. For 2 days Mary stayed with them. She helped with chores. She talked with Hannah for hours, sharing stories of the house and the other women trapped there. She was sweet and grateful and eager to please, and every night Silas watched her. On the 3rd night he pretended to sleep. At 2 in the morning Mary rose silently from her pallet by the fire. She crept to the cabin door, opened it a crack, and held up a lantern. She swung it back and forth 3 times. A signal. Silas was on her before she could scream. He clamped a hand over her mouth and dragged her away from the door. "Who is out there?" he demanded. Mary struggled, then went limp. Tears streamed down her face. "Please," she sobbed when he removed his hand. "Please, they will kill me if I do not do what they say. Who Jennings?" "And 5 others. They are waiting in the trees for my signal." Hannah appeared in the bedroom doorway, her face white. "How long have they been there since I arrived?" Mary was crying openly now. "I am sorry. I am so sorry." Whitmore said, "If I did not lead them to you, he would sell me to a mining camp in Nevada. He said I would be dead within a year." Silas looked at Hannah. She looked back at him. They could not stay. They could not fight 6 armed men. They could not even run because Jennings and his men were between them and the only path down the mountain. "The back window," Hannah said suddenly. "It faces the cliffs. We cannot climb the cliffs in a blizzard. We do not have to climb them." She grabbed his arm. "There is a gap. I saw it when I was gathering firewood. It is narrow, but it leads around to the north face." Silas made a decision. "Get your coat," he told Hannah. "Only what you can carry." Then he turned to Mary. "You have a choice," he said. "Come with us, or stay here and tell Jennings we are gone. If you come with us, I cannot promise we will survive. If you stay, you will be safe. For now." Mary looked at the door, at the darkness beyond, at the men waiting in the trees. "I cannot run any more," she whispered. "I am too tired. I am too scared." Silas nodded. He understood fear. He understood exhaustion. "Then tell them we went north," he said. "Buy us time. If you do that, I will come back for you. I will come back for all the women in that house. I swear it." Mary looked at him for a long moment. "I believe you," she said. 5 minutes later, Silas and Hannah slipped out the back window and vanished into the storm. They ran. The blizzard was a living thing, a white monster that clawed at their faces and filled their lungs with ice. Silas broke trail through drifts that reached his waist, dragging Hannah behind him when she stumbled. The gap in the cliffs was exactly where she had set a narrow fissure barely wide enough for one person to pass through. They squeezed through it single file, the rocks scraping their shoulders, and emerged on the north face of the mountain. Behind them they heard shouts, gunshots, the baying of dogs. They ran faster. For 3 hours they pushed through the darkness. When Hannah could not walk anymore, Silas carried her on his back. When his legs gave out, they crawled. Finally, just before dawn, they found the cave. It was not much, a shallow depression in the rock face hidden behind a frozen waterfall. But it was shelter. It was invisible from below. It was safety. They collapsed inside, gasping their breath, fogging in the frigid air. Hannah was shaking so badly that Silas thought she might shake apart. He pulled her close, wrapping his body around hers, trying to share what little warmth he had left. "Silas," she whispered. "I am scared." "I know. I am scared too. Will they find us?" "Not tonight. Maybe not tomorrow. But yes, eventually." She buried her face against his chest. "What do? We survive until morning. Then we make a plan." Outside, the storm raged. Inside, two people clung to each other in the darkness, listening for footsteps that might mean death. But the footsteps did not come. At some point, Hannah stopped shivering. Silas thought she had fallen asleep until she spoke. "Silas, if we do not make it out of this alive, we will. But if we do not—" She pulled back to look at him. "I need you to know something." He waited. "I do not regret coming here," she said. "I do not regret the advertisement or the train or any of it. These 11 days with you have been the happiest of my life." "Hannah, I was afraid every day before I met you," she continued. "Afraid of men, afraid of touch, afraid of my own future. But with you—" She touched his face, her fingers tracing the line of his scar. "With you, I am not afraid anymore." Silas leaned down and kissed her. It was not a gentle kiss. It was desperate and hungry and full of everything they might never have the chance to say. She kissed him back with equal ferocity, her hands fisting in his coat, pulling him closer. When they finally broke apart, both of them were crying. "I love you," he said. The words came out rough, like he was not sure how to form them. "I did not know what love was until I met you. But I know now. This is love. I love you too." She pressed her forehead against his. "The mountain man who has never known a woman. The gentlest man I have ever met." They held each other through the night, and somehow impossibly they slept. Morning came gray and cold. The storm had passed, leaving behind a world transformed. Snow lay thick on every surface, smoothing the jagged edges of the mountains into gentle curves. Silas emerged from the cave first, checking for signs of pursuit. He saw none. Either Jennings had lost their trail in the blizzard, or he had given up for the night. Either way, they had time. Not much, but some. Hannah joined him at the cave entrance. Her face was pale, her lips still blue from cold, but her eyes were clear. "We cannot go back," she said. "Not to the cabin. I know." "So where do we go?" Silas had been thinking about this all night. There was only one answer that made sense. "Cheyenne," he said. "The federal courthouse." Hannah stared at him. "That is 200 miles south," she said. "Through territory that Whitmore controls. Yes, in winter, with no supplies, no horses, no weapons except your knife and the pistol with 6 rounds. Yes." "Silas." He turned to face her fully. "Whitmore owns the sheriff in Granite Falls," he said. "He owns the county judge. He owns half the officials in the territory. But he does not own the federal court." "What do you know about federal court?" Hannah was quiet for a moment. Then she told him. 4 years ago, when she was working in the garment factory in Boston, the workers had tried to organize. The factory owners had responded with violence. But a lawyer had helped them, a young man fresh out of Harvard, who believed that the law should protect the weak as well as the strong. "He told us about federal jurisdiction," Hannah said. "How certain crimes fall outside the authority of local officials, kidnapping across state lines, interstate commerce violations, and trafficking in human beings." "Whitmore is running a trafficking operation," Silas said slowly. "Mary told us. The women in that house, if we can get to Cheyenne, if we can testify before a federal judge, if we can show that Whitmore is moving women across state lines for prostitution, then the local corruption does not matter," Silas finished. "Federal marshals answer to Washington, not to whoever owns the sheriff." "It is still 200 miles, Hannah said, "still through Whitmore's territory." "I know. We might die." "I know." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she squared her shoulders. "Then we had better start walking," she said. They walked. For 5 days they pushed through some of the most unforgiving terrain in the American West. Mountain passes choked with snow, frozen rivers that had to be crossed on foot, nights so cold that Silas was certain they would not wake up in the morning. But they kept walking. On the second day they found an abandoned trapper's cabin with dried meat and a moth-eaten blanket. They ate their first real meal in 48 hours and slept in a bed that was not made of snow. On the third day they encountered a pack of wolves. There were 7 of them, gray and lean and hungry from a hard winter. They circled Silas and Hannah on a frozen meadow, yellow eyes gleaming. Silas drew his knife and stepped in front of Hannah. "Stay behind me," he said. The wolves watched, calculated. The alpha, a massive male with a torn ear, moved closer. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then the alpha turned and led his pack away. They had looked into Silas's eyes and seen something that made them decide he was not worth the trouble. "We are not the only hungry ones out here," Hannah said quietly. "No," Silas agreed. "We are not." On the fourth day, they were almost caught. Jennings and 4 men appeared on the horizon just as Silas and Hannah were crossing a wide valley with no cover. There was nowhere to run, nowhere to hide, so they ran anyway. "Go," Silas told Hannah. "Into the trees. Do not stop until you reach the creek. I will not leave you." "Hannah." He grabbed her shoulders. "For the first time in my life I have something worth protecting. Do not take that away from me." She was crying, but she ran. Silas turned to face the approaching riders alone. There were 4 of them now, Jennings and 3 others. They rode hard and fast, and they were almost on him. Silas planted his feet, drew his knife in one hand and his pistol in the other. 6 bullets. 4 men. He liked those odds. "The hero stands alone," Jennings called as he reined up 20 feet away. "How touching. Where is Whitmore waiting for us to bring him your wife?" He smiled. "He has plans for her. Over my dead body. That can be arranged." They came at him all at once. Silas shot the first man out of the saddle before he had gone 10 feet. The second man's horse screamed and reared as Silas's knife opened its flank. The rider went down hard. Then Jennings was on him. They fought in the snow fists and knives and desperate fury. Jennings was fast and trained and ruthless, but Silas was fighting for something more than his life. He was fighting for Hannah. A bullet caught him in the shoulder. He staggered but did not fall. Jennings raised his pistol for a kill shot. Then a gun roared from behind him. Jennings looked down at the red bloom spreading across his chest. He looked up confused. Then he fell. Hannah stood at the edge of the trees, Silas's fallen pistol smoking in her trembling hands. "I told you," she said. Her voice was steady, even as tears streamed down her face. "I am not leaving you." The other men ran. 3 against 2 had become 1 against 2, and they wanted no part of it. Silas collapsed into the snow, blood pooling beneath him. Hannah ran to him. "You are hurt," she said. "The bullet." "Through and through." He gritted his teeth. "I will live." She tore strips from her petticoat and bound the wound as best she could. The bleeding slowed but did not stop. "We need to keep moving," Silas said. "You cannot walk. Then you will have to help me." She pulled his arm over her shoulder and lifted. He was easily twice her weight, but somehow she managed. They walked, 1 step at a time, through the snow, through the pain, through the growing certainty that they would never make it. But on the 5th day they saw smoke on the horizon, and on the 5th day they reached Cheyenne. They stumbled into town looking like ghosts, ragged, bloody, half dead from cold and exhaustion. People stared, children pointed, a woman screamed. But Silas kept walking, 1 foot in front of the other, Hannah at his side holding him up, refusing to let him fall. The federal courthouse loomed ahead. They climbed the steps together, and for the first time in 11 days they allowed themselves to hope. The federal courthouse in Cheyenne was built to intimidate. Gray granite walls rose 3 stories high, topped with a copper dome that had turned green with age. Massive columns flanked the entrance like stone sentinels, and the stairs leading up to the heavy oak doors seemed designed to make ordinary people feel small. Silas and Hannah climbed those stairs, slowly leaning on each other, leaving bloody footprints on the snow-covered stone. A clerk tried to stop them at the door. "You cannot come in here looking like that," he sputtered. This is a federal building. There are standards." Silas fixed him with a stare that had made wolves turn away. "We need to see the federal prosecutor," he said. "Now." The clerk looked at Hannah, at her torn dress and hollow cheeks, and the fierce determination in her green eyes. He looked at Silas, at the blood seeping through the makeshift bandage on his shoulder, at the size of his hands and the scar on his face. He stepped aside. The prosecutor's office was on the second floor behind a door with a brass nameplate that read, "Thomas Ashworth, United States Attorney." Silas knocked. "Come in." The man behind the desk was perhaps 45 years old, with silver-streaked hair and eyes as sharp as broken glass. He wore a dark suit and a silver watch chain, and he was reviewing documents with the focused intensity of someone who took his work very seriously. He looked up when they entered. His expression shifted from annoyance to curiosity to something that might have been recognition. "Sit down," he said, "before you fall down." They sat. "Now." Ashworth set down his pen. "Who are you, and why do you look like you have walked through hell to get here?" Silas told him everything. The mail order bride advertisement, the arrival in Wyoming, Whitmore's threats, the horse, the garden, the storage shed, the letter, the confrontation in Whitmore's office, Mary the spy, the chase through the mountains, Jennings dying in the snow. Through it all, Ashworth listened without interruption. His face remained neutral, but something flickered in his eyes when Silas mentioned the special house where women were kept against their will. When Silas finished, the silence stretched for a long moment. "Ezra Whitmore," Ashworth said finally. His voice was carefully controlled. "You are telling me that Ezra Whitmore, the most respected businessman in the territory, is running a human trafficking operation?" "Yes." "And you expect me to believe that based on the word of a mountain man and a mail-order bride?" Hannah leaned forward. "We expect you to investigate," she said. "We expect you to do your job." Ashworth studied her for a long moment. "You have courage, Mrs. Blackwood. I will give you that. I have truth. Truth." Ashworth stood and walked to the window, his hands clasped behind his back. "Truth is a complicated thing in this territory. Whitmore has connections, senators, governors, businessmen who owe him favors. Even if everything you say is accurate, bringing him down will not be easy." "Then you will not help us," Silas said flatly. "I did not say that." Ashworth turned back to face them. And for the first time the mask of professional neutrality slipped, revealing something raw underneath. "10 years ago," he said quietly, "my sister came to Wyoming looking for work. She was 22 years old, bright and ambitious, full of dreams about the future." He paused. "She disappeared 3 months after she arrived. No body was ever found. No explanation was ever given. But before she vanished, she wrote me a letter. She mentioned a house in Granite Falls where women were taken. She mentioned a man named Whitmore." Hannah's hand found Silas's. "I have been waiting 10 years. Ashworth continued, for someone brave enough to stand up and testify. 10 years of watching Whitmore grow richer and more powerful while women continue to disappear. 10 years of knowing the truth and being unable to prove it." He walked back to his desk and sat down heavily. "You are the first witnesses who have survived long enough to reach this office. The first who have evidence. The first who might actually give me what I need to bring him down." "You will help us," Hannah said. "I will do more than help you." Ashworth's eyes hardened. "I will destroy him." The hearing was scheduled for 7 days later. 7 days to prepare testimony. 7 days for Ashworth to gather additional evidence. 7 days for Silas's wound to begin healing and Hannah's strength to return. 7 days for Whitmore to try to stop them. On the second day, a woman came to their hotel claiming to be a journalist. She asked probing questions about Hannah's past, about Boston, about Marcus Webb. She took notes with a silver pen and smiled too much. Silas recognized the type. He had seen predators wear friendly faces before. "Get out," he told her. "But Mr. Blackwood, I only want to tell your side of the story. Your side of the story will destroy my wife's reputation. That is what you were hired to do. So get out before I throw you out." The woman left. But they found her notebook on the street the next morning, pages filled with questions designed to make Hannah look like a prostitute rather than a victim. Whitmore's reach was long. On the third day, a letter arrived from Whitmore's lawyers. If Mr. Blackwood does not withdraw his complaint, they wrote, we will be forced to reveal evidence that he murdered a man named Jack Crawley 5 years ago and sold the body to local tribes. We will also reveal that his wife is a former prostitute who married him under false pretenses. These revelations will destroy whatever reputation you have built and ensure that no one believes a word you say. Silas read the letter and laughed. What is funny? Hannah asked. They are scared, he said. Scared men make threats. Confident men make plans. He threw the letter in the fire. On the 5th day, a man bumped into Hannah on the street. It seemed accidental at first, a collision on a crowded sidewalk. But the man grabbed her arm and tried to push her toward the train tracks where a locomotive was approaching. Silas caught him by the throat. The man had $50 in his pocket, more money than a dock worker earned in 2 months. He claimed he did not know who had paid him, only that he was supposed to scare the woman. Silas let him go with a warning. Tell whoever paid you, he said, that the next man who touches my wife loses his hand. The message seemed to get through. There were no more accidents after that. On the 6th night they sat together in their small hotel room, watching the snow fall outside the window. Tomorrow, Hannah said. Tomorrow. Are you scared? Silas thought about it. No, he said finally. I have been scared most of my life. Scared of becoming my father. Scared of hurting people. Scared of letting anyone get close. But I am not scared of this. Why not? Because whatever happens tomorrow, we have already won. He took her hand. I spent 15 years alone on that mountain, convinced I did not deserve love. You showed me I was wrong. Even if Whitmore walks free tomorrow, even if we lose everything, I will still have that. Hannah leaned against him. We will not lose, she said. I did not walk 200 miles through the snow to lose. No. Silas agreed. You did not. That night, for the first time since their escape, they did not sleep on opposite sides of the bed. The courtroom was packed. Reporters from Denver, Salt Lake City, and San Francisco had come to witness the trial. Businessmen and politicians filled the gallery, some supporting Whitmore, some curious to see him fall. Local townspeople crowded the back, drawn by rumor and scandal. Whitmore sat at the defendant's table with 3 lawyers in expensive suits. He looked calm, confident, almost amused. He nodded to acquaintances in the gallery and smiled for the reporters. He looked like a man who had never lost anything in his life. Silas and Hannah sat at the prosecutor's table with Ashworth. They looked exactly like what they were, survivors who had walked through fire to reach this moment. Judge Eleanor Price presided. She was one of only 2 female federal judges in the Western Territories, 55 years old, with silver hair pulled back in a severe bun and eyes that missed nothing. This court is now in session, she announced. The United States versus Ezra Whitmore. Mr. Ashworth, you may begin. Ashworth rose. Your Honor, ladies and gentlemen, this case is about power, about a man who believed that money and influence placed him above the law, about women who were bought and sold like cattle, about a community that was too afraid to speak the truth. He paused. But it is also about courage, about 2 people who refused to be silenced, about a man who stood alone against armed attackers to protect his wife, about a woman who shot a killer to save her husband. He turned to look at Whitmore. Today the truth comes out, and today justice will be served. Hannah took the stand first. She told her story simply and clearly. The debt in Boston, Marcus Webb's threats, the advertisement for a mail-order bride, her arrival in Wyoming, her marriage to Silas. And then she told them about Whitmore, about the dead horse and the bloody message, about the burned garden and the destroyed storage shed, about the letter that threatened to expose secrets she had never actually hidden. She told them about Mary, the young woman who had been forced to spy on them, about the house in Granite Falls where women were kept as prisoners, about the escape through the blizzard and the 5-day walk to Cheyenne. When she finished, the courtroom was silent. Then Whitmore's lawyer began his cross-examination. "Mrs. Blackwood," he said, his voice dripping with false sympathy, "is it not true that you came to Wyoming as a mail-order bride?" "A woman purchased from a catalog. I answered an advertisement," Hannah said calmly. "I was not purchased. But you were desperate, were you not? Running from debt, running from obligations. Is it not possible that you are simply making these accusations to distract from your own questionable past?" Hannah looked at him steadily. "I was desperate," she agreed. "Desperate enough to travel 3,000 miles to marry a stranger. Desperate enough to risk everything for a chance at a new life. But desperation does not make me a liar." She turned to face the gallery. "I know what I saw," she said. "I know what was done to us. And I know that the man sitting at that table is responsible for the suffering of countless women. You can attack my character all you want. It does not change the truth." The lawyer tried several more angles of attack. Hannah deflected each one with quiet dignity. By the time she stepped down, even some of Whitmore's supporters in the gallery looked uncertain. Silas took the stand next. He told them about his life on the mountain, about the solitude and the silence, about the letter he had written to the matrimonial bureau because the loneliness was killing him. He told them about meeting Hannah, about her fear and his awkwardness, about the slow building of trust between two damaged people. And then he told them about Whitmore. He held nothing back. The threats, the violence, the confrontation in Whitmore's office, the chase through the mountains, the fight in the snow where he had killed 2 men and Jennings had died with Hannah's bullet in his chest. Mr. Blackwood Ashworth said, "You admit to killing men during this ordeal?" "Yes. Do you regret it?" Silas looked at Hannah. "I regret that it was necessary," he said. "I do not regret protecting my wife." Whitmore's lawyer tried to paint Silas as a violent criminal, a man who had taken the law into his own hands. Silas did not flinch. "I am 48 years old," he said. "I have lived alone for 15 years. I have never started a fight in my life. But I have finished several, and I will finish as many as necessary to keep the people I love safe." The cross-examination did not go well for the defense, but the real turning point came after lunch. Mr. Ashworth, Judge Price said, "You indicated you had additional witnesses." "I do, Your Honor." Ashworth walked to the courtroom doors and opened them. Mary walked in. She looked different than she had in Silas's cabin. She stood straight. Her bruises had faded. And she was not alone. 3 other women walked behind her, women with haunted eyes and thin wrists and the careful movements of people who had learned to make themselves small. Behind them came a United States Marshal in full uniform, his badge gleaming in the courtroom light. The gallery erupted. "Order," Judge Price commanded, banging her gavel. "Order in this court." Whitmore's face had gone gray. Mary took the stand. She told them everything. How she had been taken from a boarding house in Denver, how she had been transported to Granite Falls and held in Whitmore's house, how she had been forced to spy on the Blackwoods under threat of being sold to a mining camp. But that was not the worst of it. She told them about the other women, about the ones who had been there before her and the ones who had arrived after, about the men who came to the house at night and paid Whitmore for access, about the women who had tried to escape and were never seen again. She told them about a woman named Sarah Ashworth who had arrived 10 years ago and had asked too many questions and had disappeared one night without a trace. In the gallery, Thomas Ashworth sat motionless, tears streaming down his face. The other women testified one by one. Each story was different in its details but identical in its horror. Taken, imprisoned, used, threatened. And at the center of it all, like a spider in a web of suffering, sat Ezra Whitmore. When the last woman finished her testimony, the marshal stepped forward. "Ezra Whitmore," he said, his voice ringing through the silent courtroom, "you are under arrest for human trafficking, false imprisonment assault, and conspiracy to commit murder." Whitmore stood slowly. His composure had cracked. His hands were shaking. "You cannot do this," he said. "Do you know who I am? Do you know who my friends are?" "Your friends," Judge Price said coldly, "cannot help you here. This is a federal court. Your money and your connections mean nothing within these walls." The marshal produced handcuffs. "You will regret this," Whitmore hissed as the cuffs clicked shut. All of you. I have resources you cannot imagine. I have people everywhere." He looked at Hannah as the marshal led him past the prosecutor's table. "This is not over," he said. "I will find you. No matter how long it takes, no matter where you hide, I will find you." Silas stood. He did not say anything. He did not need to. He simply looked at Whitmore with eyes that had seen worse men and survived. Whitmore looked away first. 3 months later, Ezra Whitmore was convicted on all counts. The judge sentenced him to 25 years in federal prison with no possibility of parole. His empire crumbled. His land holdings were seized. His businesses were shut down. The house in Granite Falls was torn down, and the women who had been held there were given money from Whitmore's assets to start new lives. Mary testified at the trial and then disappeared into the Witness Protection Program. Before she left, she found Silas outside the courthouse. "You kept your promise," she said. "You came back for us." Silas nodded. "A promise is a promise." Mary smiled the first real smile he had seen from her. Then she disappeared into her new life, finally free. The last anyone heard, she was living somewhere in California under a new name. Cole Jennings was buried in an unmarked grave outside Cheyenne. No one claimed the body, no one mourned. And Silas and Hannah went home. The cabin had burned to the ground, of course. Nothing remained but charred timbers and ash-covered stone. But the land was still there. The stream still sang over its polished rocks. The mountains still stood patient against the sky. "We will rebuild," Silas said. Bigger this time, Hannah agreed. "With 2 bedrooms. 2 bedrooms." She smiled. For what is coming? The neighbors came to help. Henderson the blacksmith brought nails and lumber. Carter the farmer brought food and seeds. Even Mrs. Cartwright from the way station came armed with blankets and practical advice. No one apologized for the years of isolation. No one explained why they had kept their distance from the mountain man who lived alone. But they came. They worked. They stayed longer than necessary. And slowly the cabin rose again. It was larger than the old one, stronger, better insulated against the mountain winters. It had a proper kitchen with a wooden floor and a bedroom with a real door and a second smaller room that Silas built with particular care. Spring came. The snow melted. Green shoots pushed through the blackened ground where the fire had been. The stream ran high with snowmelt and birds returned to the trees. And Hannah told Silas that she was pregnant. He cried when she told him, not from sadness, from joy so overwhelming that his body did not know how else to express it. "I do not know how to be a father," he said. "You did not know how to be a husband either," she reminded him. "You learned. What if I fail?" "Then you try again." She took his hand and placed it on her still flat stomach. That is what love is. Trying again, even when you fail. That night, Silas lay awake for hours, his hand still resting on Hannah's belly, feeling for movement that would not come for months yet. "I will not be like my father," he whispered to the darkness. "I will not abandon you. I will not hurt you. I swear it." Hannah stirred beside him. "I know," she murmured. "That is why I am not afraid." Summer blazed across the mountain. The garden grew thick with vegetables. The new horse, a gift from Henderson, grazed contentedly in the rebuilt corral. Hannah's belly swelled with new life, and Silas watched her with a wonder that never seemed to fade. One evening, as the sun painted the peaks gold and rose, she found him sitting on the porch they had built together, staring at the horizon. "What are you thinking?" she asked. He was quiet for a long moment. 15 years ago, he said. "Finally, I stood on a cliff edge and thought about jumping." She sat beside him and took his hand. "I did not jump because a deer and her fawns walked past, and they reminded me of something I had forgotten, the warmth of belonging to someone." He turned to look at her. "You gave that back to me," he said. "You and this child. I do not stand on cliff edges anymore. I stand on porches and watch sunsets and think about how lucky I am to be alive." Hannah leaned against him. "I was afraid my whole life," she said. afraid of men, afraid of touch, afraid of hope. You taught me that not all men are monsters. You taught me that touch can be gentle. You taught me that hope is worth the risk of disappointment." They sat together as the sun sank below the mountains, two people who had been broken by the world and had somehow found each other in the wilderness. The child was born in autumn when the leaves turned gold and the first frost painted the meadows silver. It was a girl. They named her Eleanor after Judge Price, who had sent them a letter of congratulations along with a silver rattle that had belonged to her own grandmother. She had Silas's gray eyes and Hannah's stubborn chin and a cry that could be heard halfway down the mountain. She was perfect. Silas held her for the first time with hands that shook so badly Hannah had to help him. "She is so small," he whispered. "She will grow. What if I break her?" "You will not." Hannah smiled. "You are the gentlest man I have ever known. She is lucky to have you as a father." Silas looked down at his daughter, at her tiny fingers and her scrunched-up face and her absolute trust in the arms that held her. And something inside him that had been broken for 30 years finally healed. A year passed, then 2, then 10. The cabin grew larger as the family grew. A second daughter arrived, then a son. The garden expanded. The herd multiplied. The mountain that had once been Silas's prison became his paradise. Eleanor learned to ride before she could read. She had her mother's green eyes, now bright with curiosity and mischief, and her father's quiet strength. Thomas, their son, was 7 years old and fascinated by everything. He followed Silas around the ranch, asking endless questions about animals and plants and weather and stars. Rose, the youngest at 4, had been named for the flowers Hannah had planted by the cabin door, because she said after all the thorns they deserved something beautiful. They were happy, not the shallow happiness of people who have never suffered, the deep happiness of people who know exactly how much they have to lose and choose to love anyway. One autumn morning, 10 years after they had first met on that dusty train platform, Silas stood on the porch of their home and watched Hannah teaching Eleanor to ride. He was 58 years old now. His beard had streaks of gray. His joints ached on cold mornings. But his eyes were warm in a way they had not been for decades, and he smiled more in a single day than he had in all his years alone. Hannah looked up and caught him watching. She waved. He waved back. "Come down here," she called. "Your daughter wants to show you something." Silas walked down to the corral where Eleanor sat proud and straight on a horse that was far too large for her. "Watch this, Papa." She kicked her heels, and the horse broke into a smooth canter around the ring. Eleanor moved with it perfectly, her small body finding the rhythm, her hands light on the reins. When she pulled up in front of him, her face was glowing with triumph. "Did you see? Did you see?" "I saw," Silas said. He lifted her down from the horse and held her close. "I am proud of you. Will you teach me to jump next when you are older? You always say that, because it is always true." Eleanor ran off to find her siblings, leaving Silas and Hannah alone by the corral fence. "She has your stubbornness," Hannah said, "and your courage." They stood together watching their children play in the autumn sunshine. "Do you ever regret it?" Hannah asked suddenly. "Regret what?" "Writing that letter. The one that started all of this." Silas was quiet for a long moment. "I used to think," he said finally, "that I did not deserve happiness. That my parents abandoning us, my sister dying, all of it, it was punishment for something. I spent 15 years on this mountain waiting to die because I did not believe I deserved to live." He turned to look at her. "You changed that," he said. "You showed me that the past does not define the future, that broken people can be mended, that it is never too late to choose differently." Hannah took his hand. "You changed me," she said. "The woman who flinched on that train platform is gone. You taught me that fear does not have to be permanent. That trust can be rebuilt. That love is not about control." She leaned up and kissed him soft and sweet, a promise that needed no words. "I love you," she said. "From the moment I saw you standing on that platform looking as terrified as I felt. I did not know it then, but I know it now. I love you too." He pulled her close. "From the moment you flinched away from my hand, and I realized that your fear was not about me. It was about everyone who had come before." They held each other as the sun climbed higher and the children's laughter echoed across the valley. And there on the mountain where he had once been so alone, Silas Blackwood finally understood what it meant to be home. Many years later, travelers passing through the valley would tell stories about a homestead by the stream, about a giant of a man with a scarred face and gentle hands, about a woman with green eyes who had walked through fire and come out stronger. They would speak of children who grew up wild and free, who learned to ride before they could read and knew the names of every bird in the forest. They would speak of a love that had been born in desperation and tempered in hardship and had somehow become something beautiful. And when those travelers asked the old-timers about the mountain man and his mail-order bride, they would always hear the same answer. They built something rare up there. Not just a ranch, not just a family. A place where strength meant protection and healing came from being seen. They chose each other when they had no reason to trust and every reason to be afraid. And in the end, that choice made all the difference. The story ends here. But the lessons do not. Let me ask you something. When was the last time you took a chance on someone? When was the last time you let yourself be vulnerable? When was the last time you chose love over fear? Silas Blackwood was 48 years old when he wrote that letter. 48 years of loneliness. 48 years of believing he did not deserve happiness. And he found love anyway. Hannah Mercer was 22 years old when she stepped off that train. 22 years of fear. 22 years of learning that men could not be trusted. And she learned to trust anyway. It is never too late. Never. One decision, one letter, one step into the unknown. That is all it takes to change everything. If this story meant something to you, if it touched your heart or made you think, take a moment to share it with someone who needs to hear it. Someone who might be standing on their own cliff edge wondering if life is worth living. Tell them about the mountain man and his virgin bride. Tell them that broken people can heal, that trust can be rebuilt, that love is possible even when it seems impossible. Tell them that the most important choice they will ever make is the choice to try, because somewhere out there someone is waiting, someone who will see past the scars and the fear and the years of loneliness, someone who will take their hand in the darkness and say the words that change everything. I am here. I am not going anywhere, and I choose you. That is the end of this story. But perhaps for someone listening right now, it is just the beginning. Where are you watching from tonight? What time is it where you are? Leave a comment. I read every one. And remember what Silas and Hannah taught us. It is never too late to choose differently. It is never too late to hope. It is never too late to love.